Paris, France, 1886. Alexandre Santive Delvedra is standing over the only finished copies of the book he just finished writing, and he is about to destroy them all. The whole edition is stacked in front of him, years of his life freshly off the press, and he gives the order to wipe it clean off the face of the earth. Every copy pulped, scrapped, and gone before a single stranger can open and read what's inside. Out of the entire print run, only 2 copies survive. One the printer secretly kept, and one Santive took home and hid. So the question is, what do you put in a book that makes you spend your own money to erase it the moment that you make it real? A kingdom is the answer. A kingdom that Santive swore existed, hidden deep under the surface of the earth and older than every nation on the map, ruled by a king who could read any human mind like a page. Santive believed in it completely to the very end of his life, and the instant he'd written it all down where anybody could read it, something about it frightened him so badly, he decided to take it all back in fear. Santive never explained why, but whatever he thought he had touched did not stay buried with him, because half a century later, the most dangerous regime in human history went looking for it at the bottom of the world. And this is a video about that kingdom. Its name is Agartha. It is one of the strangest strings that I have ever pulled on, because the further down the string you go, the bigger the names get, and the more things start adding up, I guess, if you are an insane person maybe. This is truly a ridiculous and scary and absurd rabbit hole. Please, come along with me. If you're new, hit the subscribe button. You're gonna wanna stick around for what's next. If you're old, may God have mercy on you. Comment down below what you wanna see me cover in the next video, and this one starts with one obscure Frenchman. Then a Russian running for his life. Then a respected philosopher. Then a world-famous novelist. Then the woman who basically invented modern occultism, and then eventually, the SS, you know, the Nazis. For 150 years, people have hunted this place. A handful of them swore that they found the door, but not one of them ever came back with a single brick. Maybe that's because it's being hidden, it's being suppressed, it's obfuscated, my favorite word. Either way, the evidence has caused lots of people to believe it, and the lack of evidence has pretty much not stopped anybody from believing it, including supposedly the men running Nazi Germany. There's a ton of information about this on the internet, so I did my best to capture as much as I could and put it in one cohesive bundle. In terms of books, my library card's expired, and honestly, I can't really read. So the only book that I could really find that traces the whole sort of thing from end to end is a very strange out-of-print book from 1993 by a scholar named Jocelyn Godwin. He called it Arctos, and the place that this stops just being a weird old book and strange legend and story and starts being something a government would send ships and men to go find is Antarctica, and that's where we're going first. You guys know that I love Antarctica, all right? There's something up there, or down there rather. There's something down there. It's bullshit. I'm going down there one of these days. The men who built the Nazi movement in the early 20th century weren't only obsessed with conquering the real known world that actually exists, but a surprising number of them were obsessed with a world that supposedly doesn't exist. Before the party ever held any real power, it grew up tangled together with a whole subculture of German occult societies and groups that taught that the German people were the last living remnant of an ancient master race. You've probably heard of that idea before. A race that had come down out of the lost paradise in the frozen north. And that the secret of that race's godlike power was still out there somewhere. Probably not to the north, but rather down south, because Antarctica is down south. The North has just got Santa up there. And that shit was just waiting to be dug up, they thought. And the story that has been told for the better part of a century is that when the Nazis finally went hunting for it, they went to the one place on Earth that almost no human had ever set foot, Antarctica. Schwabenland! In the winter of 1938, Hitler's government sent a secret expedition to the bottom of the world. A ship called the Schwabenland with seaplanes catapulted right off its deck. And as they flew, the crew dropped heavy metal lawn darts stamped with the swastika into the ice below, claiming a slice of the continent and renaming it New Schwabia. That is real. That is documented history. That's in the record. I'm not making that up for clicks and wipes. I'm all about wiping now. swiping. And the legend that grew up around it says that they were not down there for the ice or the cute little penguins or even the land. They were hunting for a door, a way into a kingdom that supposedly sat beneath the surface of the planet. And that kingdom is Agartha. And if you take the believers at their word, it is an entire civilization with millions and millions and millions of people. By the most repeated count online that you can find, 800 million in cities lit by their own underground sun, with universities and aircraft and a web of tunnels running under the whole world. Already doing all of that while we were up here trying to get filament to not explode when we put it in a light bulb. And at the center of all of it, a throne and a ruler the believers call the king of the world, a being who they say can read any human soul like an open page. And the source of the whole kingdom's power, the thing that supposedly lets them heal a dying man 1 minute and level a city the next minute, is an energy its masters run straight through their own bodies. And the believers have a name for it. They call it Vril, like krill, but with a V, and with much deeper ties to white supremacy. That, the story says, is what the Nazis were really chasing down under the ice. The lost energy type of battery of an ancient master race. What's crazy is that I've heard so much of this stuff growing up and spending time on the internet and hearing people talk about it. Like they have the acorn, the glockenspiel, I don't think that's what it's called, but Nazi occultism is very interesting, and they believed in some wild shit. I love the images of Agartha, by the way. It is really funny to me. There's also a prophecy, and that prophecy is ticking down and will come into effect apparently in the year 2030, which is in 4 years. Or something. You see, the lore says the kingdom left the surface people, us, a prophecy more than a century ago. There would be 50 years of chaos, then a stretch of false peace, then one final war. And at the end of it, the people of the kingdom would come up out of the ground and take the surface back. Kind of like that video game where those mole people came out of the ground or whatever. That shit was on Xbox. I don't have any other memories beyond that. Now, how much of this is true? Take a guess right now. We're gonna get all the way to the bottom of it, I promise. Okay, guys? But first, to understand why any modern-ish government would take any of it seriously enough to send an entire ship and crew, you gotta actually understand where the idea of this kingdom came from. The idea of an underground civilization, not just Agartha, specifically, or Asgartha, or Asgard, or whatever the other names it has. It's a pretty big idea that a ton of civilizations and cultures have pondered. The idea of an underworld. The Greeks, the Hindi people had one called, I forget what it was called. It starts with a P though. But specifically with Agartha, it comes from the man that we opened this video with, the fellow who wrote it all down and then tried to just take it back, I guess. He had some severe guilt over it or something like that. So let's go back to Santiv, alone with that doomed book. The book was called Mission de India, his mission from India. And in it, he laid out Agartha in astonishing detail. This guy was like the Tolkien of the French. A hidden land beneath the surface ruled, in Godwin's words, the person who wrote the book back in 1993, by a supreme pontiff of Ethiopian race styled the Brahmata. With millions of subjects, a secret society of masters that Santiv believed really should be running the world, with a system he called synarchy, which is ruled by an enlightened council working from the shadows. And he said that he knew all of this because a mysterious teacher had appeared in his life, taught him a lost sacred language, and then vanished. And when Godwin later on went looking for who that teacher actually was, the most he could conclude was, nobody knows. But anyways, this was still taken very seriously by the Nazis and then us allegedly after World War II. So it's still worth talking about, okay? Also, Santiv wasn't even first. Godwin traced the word Agartha itself back 13 years earlier. By the way, at that point, that was the first time the word had ever been uttered by anybody. It was originally traced to a French judge named Louis Jacquelot, who in 1873 wrote about an ancient lost city that he spelled Asgartha, based on manuscripts that conveniently no other living person has ever managed to find. This guy was like the Joseph Smith of France. And Jacquelot City was not underground. Santiv took Jacolio's city, buried it underground, and then filled it in with more lore. And then Godwin obviously wrote about all of this many, many, many years later. Given all of this, Godwin, a careful scholar, did not think that Santiv was lying. A con man would have tried to sell the secret. Santiv tried to erase the secret, and Godwin comes down on the side of belief. He writes, "I believe that Santiv did see what he described, and that he did not consider himself to the slightest degree to be writing fiction," which makes the burning book stranger, not less strange. So this is just a really confusing tale overall. Then, quite a few years later, in 1922, the story had its second witness and finally the prophecy. A Polish scientist named Ferdynand Ossendowski. By the way, we have 3 credible men here so far. 3 very credible people. Sure, it was the 1800s, you could just lie about shit. You know, you could pad your resume with whatever you wanted, but we got 3 legit guys with real good titles here. It's pretty impressive. So basically what I'm saying is it's probably real. Maybe, I don't know. Probably not, but maybe. Ossendowski was fresh off a genuine harrowing escape across Mongolia during the Russian Civil War. He was escaping the evil Bolsheviks. The man came home and wrote a bestseller in which the local lamas had supposedly told him about a buried kingdom. He spelled it Agartha, 800 million subjects, a king of the world, and the prophecy, the one with the clock on it that ends in 2030. That all comes straight out of his book. In the 50th year, only 3 great kingdoms will appear, which will exist happily 71 years. Afterwards, there will be 18 years of war and destruction. Then the peoples of Agartha will come up from their subterranean caverns to the surface of the earth. End quote. That was a real recording of his voice. And get this, guys! Ossendowski swore he had never read Santiv's version, which is pretty interesting. The 2 versions are very similar. Same name, pretty much, same general ideas, and those 2 versions have sat so closely together that real, genuine scholars have argued about it for 100 years. There's a pattern to this, you're probably starting to understand. Every new eyewitness to this ancient secret shows up right after the last man's book hits the shelves. Genius! And by 1927, a serious French philosopher, René Guénon, had recast Agartha as a symbolic spiritual center of the world, which made it pretty bulletproof, because you can't really mount an expedition to a spiritual metaphor, you know? You do, no matter what, you just come home empty-handed. But none of that by itself explains the Nazis' interest in Antarctica or, you know, the underworld civilization. And a lot of it came post-war. A lot of the ties were put together well after. So to understand more of that, you have to understand the other half of the legend, which is the power, Vril. Vril did not come from a monastery or lost manuscript. It came from a novel. In 1871, the wildly famous English novelist Edward Bulwer Lytton published a science fiction story about a traveler who fell into an underground world ruled by a superior race called the Vrilia. The people that lived there were taller, calmer, and more beautiful than us, and contemptuous of us wielding that all-purpose energy, Vril. And these people fully intended to come up one day and replace us. This was all made up. Bulwer Lytton said so himself. He wrote privately that he'd meant Vril as a kind of imagined electricity, which was developed into uses as yet only dimly guessed. He just made it all up, like L. Ron Hubbard made up Scientology and the lore behind that. People have been making shit up for a really long time. I love people making shit up, it's fun. Human lore is the best lore. Did you know rubbing onion on your scalp often makes you fit in better at onion-based social events? So after this guy made that up, the woman who built modern occultism, who made a lot of stuff up, got a hold of it. Helena Blavatsky. Godwin called her the most fecund source of ideas on our subject. By the way, fecund, one of my favorite words of all time. She started writing about Vril as if it were just real, and taught that humanity had passed through a series of root races, one of which had come from a lost homeland in the far north, a polar paradise, a superior people. You might notice that I keep saying north, but Antarctica is south, and the Nazis went south, New Swabia. There's a lot of overlap. The north and south difference is kind of, it's obviously very different. They're literally opposites, but they both connect. See what I'm saying? See what I'm saying? It makes sense. So a made-up energy and a made-up master race were both promoted into ancient occult fact. It's way easier to make shit up back in these times. Still just as fun though. Now, take all that, look at what it becomes in the hands of, the Nazis. A handful of Austrian and German occultists took Blavatsky's northern modern race and turned it into something a lot more extreme. The belief that the true master race was a bloodline of blonde, blue-eyed god-men that descended from a vanished polar civilization, and one of those German-Austrian men ran an occult order that admitted only blonde, blue-eyed members, but a lot of those guys they looked straight up inbred. The poster child of the Aryan Nazi master race movement looks nothing like the average high-ranking Nazi. I mean, what is this, dude? I mog all of these syphilis-infected incels. I'm German. Let me check my 23andMe, just so you guys know that I'm allowed to talk about this. Oh shit, I have a highly increased likelihood of PTSD, apparently. Since when does it tell me health stuff? This is not good. I'm gonna spiral. 40 out of 100 people with genetics like yours have been diagnosed with PTSD by their 40s? I think I'm fine. Probably. And all this fed straight into a Munich group founded in 1918 called the Thule Society, or I thought it was for a long time Thule, but researching it, it's Thule, which is weird. It looks like Thule. And their real, very documented importance is pretty simple and pretty chilling, I guess is a good word. It bankrolled the tiny political party at the time that a young Adolf Hitler would walk into, take over, and rebuild into the Nazi party. You can probably see why this specific fantasy caught this specific regime. They had a hidden master race, a lost northern homeland. They went to the south to find stuff in the south or what, I don't know. It's a lot of weird speculation, but secret godlike powers. To them, this was not LARPing or some kind of bedtime story. To them, it was a look in the mirror. They looked in the mirror and didn't see this. Instead, they saw this somehow. That's right, that's me. That's a Snapchat filter. Isn't that cool? Anyways, to God, when the mysticism was, in his words, picked up and used as a political weapon. It isn't like a secret religion running the war or anything like that, but the darkest version of the legend grew literally out of that soil. The whispered Vril Society of psychic blondes supposedly channeling alien blueprints for flying saucers, and long after the war, a fringe of Hitler worshippers who kept the dream alive under a new emblem called the Black Sun. So that's pretty much what the Nazis thought was under the ice. Not Wales, not really territory, but rather potentially the lost homeland of a master race and the power to rule the world with it. And, honestly look pretty good while doing it in terms of the fashion, okay? Like, that's for sure. Now, that's all crazy. What did they actually find when they got to Antarctica? Not north, but rather south. We keep saying north, we're conflating the two, but it's confusing. It seems like nobody realizes that they're different. Here is what the secret Nazi expedition to Antarctica was actually for. Margarine. Now, that sounds crazy. I'll explain it, because the truth is more hilarious than the legend. Whale oil was the single most important raw material Germany had for making fat. Margarine, cooking fat, soap, industrial lubricants, and by the late 30s, Germany was the second largest buyer of whale oil on Earth, importing something like 200,000 tons of it every single year, most of it from Norway. And to a regime planning a war and haunted by the blockade that helped starve it in the last one, buying the fat to feed your own people from your future enemies was a strategic nightmare. So Hermann Goering, or Russell Crowe, running the economy under the 4-year plan, ordered an expedition to go find Germany its own whaling grounds at the bottom of the world, and then just stake a claim to that on the way as well. The ship that he sent was an old Lufthansa mail vessel called the Schwabenland. It was built to fling seaplanes off a catapult to carry post across the Atlantic. Left Hamburg in December of 1938 with 82 men under a polar captain named Alfred Richter and 2 Dornier flying boats with perfect German names, the Passat and the Boreas, the Trade Wind and the North Wind. Over about 3 weeks of flying in early 1939, the crew photographed something like 1/3 square kilometers of coastline and dropped those infamous swastika lawn darts to claim it. This is mine! It has my lawn dart in it! Now the darts were meant to be scattered across the whole survey, corner to corner, fencing off the territory from the air, but because of the flying conditions, the crew ended up dumping nearly the entire batch in one spot all at once. So the great Nazi conquest of a continent came down to a single bag of darts literally thrown out of an airplane window. They didn't build a base as far as we know of. They never once set foot in the interior as far as they know of, and the Norwegians had actually claimed the very same coast a few days before the Germans even arrived. By 1945, Germany had pretty much let the whole thing drop, and Germany's first real permanent Antarctic station wouldn't be opened until 1981. So the most useful thing the expedition found was a stretch of bare, ice-free rock dotted with little tiny lakes. And the pilot who spotted it, a man named Schirmacher, named it after himself. Now that rock, very important. Imagine it in your mind. Can you see it? It's like an apple. Just kidding, it's a rock. But hold it in your mind, it'll make sense in a second. So what I just said, which is documented, is way less cool than the legends. Way less crazy, way less interesting, almost like it always is. It's always way more boring. So maybe they're just hiding that shit. 'Cause we went just after World War II, and that shit was creepy and freaky as well. But we'll get to that just like we'll get to the rock. So if there was a secret war over Antarctica, which a large portion of people swear that there was, where did that come from? And this is where everything gets even more interesting. I'm talking 50% more. In the middle of the Second World War, Britain ran a covert military operation to the Antarctic. Real ships with a real secret operation. A code name borrowed from a Paris nightclub called Operation Dabarin. They chose that nightclub name because of the night work and the chaos. You know, it was pretty hilarious in the 40s, I guess. This expedition was led by a marine biologist named James Marr, who had actually sailed with Shackleton, and they slipped out of London in November of 1943. So the conspiracy crowd is right that there was a secret wartime mission to the bottom part of the entire world, but the enemy is backwards, kind of. The British were not hunting a Nazi base. They were worried about Argentina, a neutral country at the time that was quietly pressing its own claim to the same frozen islands, while Britain had its hands full with Hitler. And when Marr's men reached Deception Island, the one natural harbor for hundreds of miles and the obvious place any ship would hide, they came ashore and braced for whatever they might found. What they found was an Argentine flag painted on an old whale oil tank. So they painted over it, ran up the Union Jack, and put up a hut. By all accounts, this seems to be the real secret Antarctic war of the Second World War. That's not yours. Do the Queen justice, put up the old Union Jack. That little flag over there. Let's eat some bangers and mash. Oi, London's getting bombed. I'm sorry. Oh, what a tragedy. I'm so sorry, guys. It's been long enough, though, I think. I'm sorry. Oi, they're bombing London. They're bombing me beanhole. But that's not all. Fortunately, there was another expedition, and this expedition is the one that really gives the meat and potatoes to the legend, all right? The legend of Antarctica, the legend of this secret thing, because this ties in the Nazis too. This ties in the Nazis. The Nazis were hyper obsessed with Hyperborea, the Great North. And then there's like the South, and they went to Antarctica, and then there's all these different really confusing lines that are all just loosely connected. This is the thread that ties them all together, all right? And I believe in this one. Just kidding. Yes, I do, kind of, but like 10% of me. Like there's a small chunk of my brain that I have no control over. And that's the part that believes in me. It's the same part that tells me I have to poop, I think. In 1946, the year after the war, the US Navy launched its largest expedition Antarctica has ever seen before or since. The official name was almost aggressively boring: the United States Navy Antarctic Developments Program. But everybody just calls it Operation Highjump because that's way cooler. The numbers in regard to this operation are the type that'd get a conspiracy theorist hard as a rock. Nearly 4,700 men, 13 ships, including the aircraft carrier Philippine Sea and a submarine. Around 30 aircraft, all led on the ground by Admiral Richard Cruzen, with Admiral Richard Byrd, very important, as the officer in charge. Now, the big point of the conspiracy here is, why send a battle fleet, a carrier, a submarine, and 5,000 men to go take pictures of ice where there's nothing? That's very confusing and doesn't make a lot of sense. It seems like they're hiding something or covering something up. The reality probably was that the Cold War was beginning and the next war was expected to be fought over the top of the world, because that's the shortest path from us, major superpower, to the Soviet Union, major superpower. You know, and like, obviously you're not gonna go up there and do stuff because they're gonna think you're going up there to do stuff to them. So you go down and you find an analog. It's the cleanest laboratory on Earth for learning to move, fight, and survive in extremely cold wastelands, essentially. And another actually documented reason, in the Navy's own words, was consolidating and extending potential American sovereignty over the largest practicable area of the Antarctic continent. And in plain English, that means get there fast, get flag over big spot before bad red man do. So it's an outward science, inward militaristic land grab, kind of. This apparently also did not end in a secret battle, unfortunately. It ended early because the Antarctic winter rolled in and pack ice began closing in on the ships. Nobody really died from any of this. Only a few men died in accidents, 3 of them when a seaplane went down in a whiteout on a remote island, with 6 crewmates actually surviving 13 days out on ice before a rescue plane could reach them, which that's extremely impressive. So that's pretty lame. It's also even more deflating when you learn this fact about the whole armada. The 70,000 photographs they brought home were nearly useless for map making and cartography because nobody had laid out the survey markers on the ground that you actually needed to turn aerial photos into real charts. So the Navy had to send an entire second expedition all the way back the very next year just to fix that shit. Yeah, it seems like a normal government program, if you ask me. After this boring expedition is where things get extremely interesting. Right after Highjump, Admiral Byrd gave an interview to a Chilean newspaper called El Mercurio in 1947. And in the published account, he warned that the United States could be attacked by planes flying over one or both poles, which seems like a fairly sober and obvious Cold War warning about Soviet bombers taking the route over the top or bottom of the globe. But you take planes and you turn that into flying objects, and then you tack on the phrase "at incredible speeds," and a decorated admiral's warning about the Russians becomes a decorated admiral confessing UFOs. Now there's also the other half of the legend saying that Hitler himself slipped away to a Nazi base in Antarctica, and that's why we went down there to go grab Hitler and, stuff him full of marshmallows or whatever we did with him. This part of the legend comes from 2 real submarines. In the summer of 1945, months after Germany surrendered, 2 German U-boats came up off the coast of Argentina and gave themselves in. They were very strange, to say the least. The first had taken 2 extra months to get there and couldn't fully account for the time. It had thrown its logbook and its deck gun into the sea, and its crew carried no identification. And within weeks, an Argentine newspaper was claiming a submarine had quietly put a high-ranking officer and a woman ashore in the dark, a man and woman who may have been Hitler and Eva Braun. It is a very eerie little stack of facts, I've got to say. It's pretty bizarro, and it is also just as genuinely pretty much nothing. The Argentine Navy investigated and stated flatly that no one had been landed. Of course they did. It seems like some South American countries really like the Nazis. I don't know what's up with that, but I've noticed that, all right, guys? Ever been to Colonia Dignidad? Okay, that shit's a little crazy. The second U-boat's captain spent years afterward and wrote an entire book refuting the accusation that he'd ferried Hitler anywhere, explaining he'd run for neutral Argentina because Nazi propaganda had convinced him the Allies meant to enslave every German man. And historians have also since shown that both boats could not physically have reached Antarctica in the dead of the southern winter. But the cleanest fact of all, that ties the whole thing up like a nice little, tied up like my shoes, honestly. In kindergarten, I taught my whole kindergarten class how to tie their shoes when I was in kindergarten. My mom brags about that all the time. Remember the livable spot that the Germans found? Schirmacher's Bear Patch of ice-free rock, the single most habitable ground in the entire territory and the most obvious place to hide a base? That is exactly where the Soviets 2 decades later chose to build a research station. Interesting. They were also the first ones to the moon. Maybe they used ancient Vril technology that they found from the Nazis. The Brotherhood moved in, they put it up from the bare ground, and they found precisely one thing waiting for them under that ice, guys. Nothing. They didn't find anything at all. The whole Antarctica thing actually ended not in a firefight, not in 2 UFOs colliding, but rather in Washington in 1959. After a couple of years of rival nations actually cooperating on the ice for the first time ever, mainly because it was just science stuff, 12 countries that hated each other, the United States and the Soviet Union among them, at the absolute peak of the Cold War, signed a treaty that froze every territorial claim on the continent and handed the whole thing over to science. Pretty cool. Rival superpowers aiming literal nuclear missiles at each other across every other inch of the planet picked one place to share. Is it the blonde-haired, blue-eyed people under the ice? Yeah! It sure is! That is honestly stranger, though, than a bunch of hidden cities and blonde supermen. Now, I still haven't talked about what most people talk about when they talk about this. That is Admiral Byrd's secret diary, okay? In 1947, Admiral Byrd was flying over the North Pole when his compass starts to spin and the frozen white below him turns an impossible green. This secret diary has him radioing it in, almost in panic, saying, quote, "There should be no green valley below." He sees hills, forests, rivers, and then grazing in a valley that literally cannot exist is a living woolly mammoth, a thing that cannot exist. Then suddenly his controls go dead and 2 disc-shaped aircraft rise off his wingtips, glowing and marked with, you guessed it, swastikas. They guide him down where he's met by tall, beautiful blonde men who walk him into a gleaming underground city. And there he's brought before a figure that the diary calls the Master, who tells him the hidden world has watched us with dread ever since we split the atom. You'll have learned to tamper with a certain power that is not for man, namely that of atomic energy. Byrd is sent home with a warning, and then the story goes silenced. Beautiful, beautiful, tall, blonde, serene men worried about our weapons, the exact master race figure that we just traced out of the Victorian novel through Blavatsky into the SS. Now, literally waiting on an American admiral under the ice. The blonde Superman of the lost North or South, it all blends together to me, taking one last curtain call. All right, guys, it is a genuinely spectacular story. The hero, the hidden world, the warning, the cover-up. And by the way, Admiral Byrd never breathed a word of this once while he was alive. His secret diary turned up a good bit later, so it'd be a nice tidy little place to call this bitch a hoax and just move the f on. Admiral Byrd was the real deal. He was arguably the most accomplished polar explorer that America ever produced. In November of 1929, Byrd and 3 other men flew a single Ford trimotor over the South Pole, the first human beings to ever do that shit. He'd named the plane the Floyd Bennett after the man who'd flown his earlier expeditions, who by then had died. And also, that flight nearly killed those 3 men. The plane was too heavy to climb over the wall of mountains between the coast and the pole, aka the ice wall. Just kidding. But as they clawed towards the one high glacier pass, the pilot, Bernd Balkran, shouted that they were not going to clear it, so Byrd ordered the crew to start throwing food out the door. All the emergency rations that would have kept them alive if they'd have gone down. It bought just enough altitude to scrape over the ridge by a few hundred feet. These are incredible men, and Byrd, an incredible man. The man who built a base on the Ross Ice Shelf, called it Little America, who then came back a few years later and spent 5 months alone in a buried weather hut through the Antarctic winter, slowly poisoning himself on fumes from a bad stove until a rescue party reached him half dead in the dark. He wore the Medal of Honor, and Congress made him an admiral by special act. Then there was even an Academy Award-winning film about his expedition. He was not a mystic, he was not a fool, he was a real man, which is what makes the real secret diary kind of hard to look away from. And you know, it's It's interesting. Godwin, our 1993 friend, saw it coming back in 1993 in the same out-of-print book we've been talking about throughout this entire video. He floated a suspicion that he openly admitted he could not prove, and that was that the flight that made Byrd a legend in the first place might never have happened the way Byrd actually said it did. He called it circumstantial, and Godwin left it hanging there. But 3 years later, somebody found some proof. If we go all the way back to 1926, before the South Pole, before Little America, before any of this incredibly impressive real stuff, and kind of during the, the Agartha and Vril stuff, the flight that built the Byrd legend was a dash for the North Pole. Byrd's whole reputation rested on that single circumstantial claim that they had gotten there first, that they were the first men to ever do it. I said it, I got fired up when I said it. In 1996, an archivist at Ohio State University named Raymond Gerler was working through Byrd's old papers and found his original 1926 flight diary, which was a small weathered notebook that nobody had opened really in 70, 80 years. And inside it were his sextant readings. Some of the numbers had been erased, but only lightly enough that you could still read them underneath, and the figures erased in his private diary did not match the figures in the official report that he later filed to claim the record. At the very same instant of the very same flight, the diary says that the sun sat at one height, and the report that he officially turned in says another. And it's a gap wide enough to leave him well short of the pole. A navigator named Dennis Rollins worked it all the way through and concluded that Byrd flew most of the way and turned back early when an engine started throwing oil, and then altered the numbers to cover the miles he hadn't flown. Now, to be fair, like Agartha and Vril, this is also unsettled. Nobody knows shit about history, dude. It's bullshit. It's all made up. It's unsettled. Let's argue about it. I don't want to argue about it. I'll put you in a soul gym if you don't listen to me. If you don't, Admiral Byrd's a legend! So other navigators have run the same figures and defended him. One, Joseph Portney, put Byrd within about 50 miles of the pole. So whether or not he fell short, I don't give a The only other guy who could have settled it was Floyd Bennett, and he died of pneumonia within 2 years after doing it with him. I'm starting to think we shouldn't be reading people's secret diaries, all right? For all the Nazi expeditions and the Admiral diaries, it doesn't seem like anything officially was found under the ice. The kingdom probably was never really under the ice. It seems like it was just kind of made up in the late 19th century, all right? Just kind of made up by an author. Godwin's verdict on this is that the man who first put the word on paper, Jacquelio, is the man who deserves the dubious credit of creating the Agarthian myth. Then every single person after him just kind of took it and then just ran with it and just added some shit into it, and none of it's real. I don't know. There are some strange mysteries in Antarctica, but they're always way more fun to think about than they actually are. But all this being said, still doesn't answer a lot of questions. We still don't know. We'll probably never know why the was Santiv so afraid of releasing that book in 1886 if there's just no secret to guard, if he's just making it all up. He wrote something so vivid, he got lost in the sauce legitimately. He could feel it slipping out of his hands and possibly growing into something he'd never get back. He yoinked that shit back, dude. And then the Admiral's secret diary, the Green Valley, the Master, the Tall Blonde People, that shit was published in 1964. Admiral Byrd died in 1957. It all kind of blew up post-World War II, and a lot of it was put in the mouth of a man who'd been dead for 7 years and couldn't say a word against any of it. The forager called himself Raymond Burnand, with the real name Walter Siegmeister. And if you read the diary and also heard what I said earlier, which you may have corrected me, I said the following. First, the diary is dated to 1947 and dated to the exact months that the real Byrd was at the bottom of the world at the South Pole. I said he flew over the North Pole. South Pole, that's Operation Highjump. That's where he was in real life. That's when it was dated, but the story inside it is about flying over the North Pole. So the most famous proof of this whole thing can't get the poles right. But what about 2030? Guess we'll have to wait 4 years and see. The prophecy is real!